I don't think that's a.
Hey, Duncan, can you get that off the stage thing? That's ours. Just put that on the card.
Oh, 1, 2. So it's taking the microphone as the logic on internal. Can you take the audio as XR picking? Yeah. It's not plugged in properly.
For the microphone?
Yeah. So we'll have to change it from this.
It should be using that. What is it? The other one's Logitech. See?
Yeah, but the internal, it should be giving an external option.
Yeah, that should be.
The saver system should be external.
Can I take it out and re-plug in?
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
These two are Logitech. That's that.
I know.
The only other option is that, which is the internal. This is the internal microphone.
The internal should be this laptop.
Right.
It's not picking up.
I know.
It's not showing the option.
Speaker, headphone. No, but we want the audio is a headphone. Is this on the mic or the headphone port? Oh, it's a combo port.
Yeah. Oh,
okay. They both connect as ISST. That's the thing about it. Headphone and internal mic. That's what we're in. That's what we're in right now. Yeah, that's what we're in.
If you go back out to the system, the computer recognizing it, and Zoom's just one friendly. Yeah, it not anywhere.
Only Zoom that's logging in. We need to plug in the power. The power is not up.
Yeah, it's using that one. Headphone port.
Yes, power is good.
The option, right? So they're not hearing anything?
No, we cannot hear that. Let me check that.
The speaker and headphone, that's all the option.
I think this might be something to headphone because that's combo. Yeah, headphone. Combo, yeah, combo shows the headphone. But it's not picking it up. The Zoom is not picking it up.
We figured that.
I mean, we can restart that for him. The Zoom. Just close it out. We can ask them to log in again. Or maybe it might be locked.
Well, the thing about it is, it's going green. It's picking up sound.
It's picking up.
But it's because of this microphone. This microphone.
Yeah.
Laptop microphone. There's no external speaker.
It is.
Internal mic.
Let me say the same as that's the speaker though. That's Logitech. That's the camera.
Can you do the same system? Make sure
But that's the speaker.
Yeah. Oh, that's the headphone. Yeah, that's headphone. That's good one. Oh, speaker. Yeah, it's not the speaker. Can we test it out?
Hold on, let me see.
Yeah.
Down here, change your default or your audio input. You right click it. Sound settings. Essential. We're actually right here. Input.
Everyone, we're just going to set up the Zoom so everyone participating online has the experience. Melissa is on her way, so ISEF. Just a note before we start, so you guys know, if you do happen to run out of power, outlets at the tables at the back. If you need to go to the washroom, all the washrooms you can.
I don't have it. It's Zoom webinar. Yeah, but you can't go in the audience, right? That's what I mean.
Sorry, I didn't like that. Washroom, you can have, there's one to the left and one to the right.
Hold on. First of all, nobody's listening to see if it's even working.
I'm checking.
Yeah, I just told them to log in on the phone. Yeah, but right now nobody's in front of us. We're doing stuff. That's what I'm saying. We just
Same thing up though, it looks like it's not.
This has 2 or 3. Three. No, it's a 2. It got to be 3 for me. This is a speaker port. Where's the guy?
What do you need?
You can hear it.
You hear it now.
Right, not with that. This is a 2.
Did you see where the audio got there? Huh? The audio. It's not the mic.
You need to mute the microphone when they're starting.
So because they're both the same port, you got the one with the 3 lines because this is the speaker. The one with the 3 lines.
This is the 3 line. This is a stereo.
Mic and stereo.
It's a stereo.
Left, right.
Left, right, and round. That's what it has. 3 phases. Our board is not that. This is an outside line. Okay. What might be happening is that when you plug it into here, it may not be lining up. Be prongs.
Right.
One is the mic and 2 is the speaker. It may not be lining up correctly.
Oh, exactly. That's what I said. Do you have another one?
We'll have another one like this.
No, the one that has the 3 to line up. Yeah, that's the speaker. That's why.
Right.
This is the same thing.
So
Speaker
you
on
want
the
a,
sound.
so you want a mono plug. Well, that's a stereo plug too.
Yeah, this is stereo.
So where did you try plugging it in that?
Plugging it
Yeah,
right.
It's headphone and mic.
Yeah, it's a headset.
Yeah.
It doesn't have another input on here. Todd, we'll call you back. We'll call you. See, because you don't have another input on here for an external mic, it'd have to go here.
You got one that's HDMI.
You got an HDMI input? Yeah.
I can't take input as well.
Just plug the device into your audio jack. Go to the microphone here, try that. Okay. Microphone access from the device is on change. That's all you get is on and off, right?
I gotta use the sound from the camera then. Unfortunately.
What we can do is maybe. Now you need an audio interface. This is a block. Right. Yeah, I'm going to say it.
No, it's still.
But I don't know what to ask.
We just don't know what to figure out.
Tell them we need.
You just got a headset.
You got a laptop.
It's just so that we can pick it. Right. So the thing about it, though, is the input might be different. On different.
So you're gonna have questions that Hey, listen. Hey, good question. We got a lot of as a single port, audio and mic. Feeding off the Do you have
Doesn't have USB-C. You have the audio or like
Just going down.
then that would work.
This has USB-C?
Yeah.
We're going to get an interface. What we use.
Oh, you can follow the whole deck.
Yeah, it's a
You have the
little-
converter?
Yeah. You guys just muted for the opening ceremony for now because we gotta start. We gotta start soon.
Feed.
Okay. Just go ahead with it.
So just mute for the opening ceremony, and hopefully by the time the workshop's here, it'll be fixed up.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I'm gonna switch mics. Back to mic at least.
I'm so happy we're finally here in the ballroom. We've been really looking forward to this event for quite some time, and we hope you guys have it as well. You know, it's not a traditional hackathon in the sense that there's going to be voting like we usually host hackathons, but we really cut down hackathons to core ideas. What is that? We're bringing to you workshops, we're bringing to you some fun activities, and a chance to interact. But best of all, we're giving you the chance to meet some people you've never met before. So we hope you guys value that as much as we do. So we're part of XdHacks Mini, a hackathon organization which promotes student hackathons. So what we do is we get students to host hackathons, and I was hosted at first. In 2019, I helped with Lucy, who's here actually on the team, hosted the first ever hackathon in Vancouver, BC in 2019. It was great fun, and I've been in love with the concept of hackathon ever since. So I'm really happy I can introduce you guys to our version and what our interpretation of what a hackathon is. This is the schedule. I hope you guys have seen this. Just going to go over this quickly. We are quite on that schedule. Due to technical difficulties, but we're getting it. We're going to start off the opening ceremony right now. Then Melissa Tigas is going to come talking about her work at Startup Accelerator. Then we have a keynote on some successful solutions related to the which I won't go over just yet. That's going to be by Matthew Ralph, who's a professor at Georgia Tech. Then we're going to have a little activity for you guys after you guys have been happy a little bit. And then the in-person portion of the event will close. However, if we wanted to give you the chance to keep working on this even after the in-person quiz, submissions for your one-pagers will actually be at midnight together. So keep that in mind that you should have submission forms in the email that you're receiving after I announced the degree and in previous times. So I've talked a bit about XdHacks Mini. If you guys are interested, we are always looking to expand our reach. We always take on students who are willing and wanting to actually create an impact in their local community. This QR code here, it was sent to an email last night. It is the XdHacks Mini brochure. Something we put together just for this space so you guys can get a bit of a rundown of what we're doing here. And we can see the rounds that we currently operate and how much we actually done. We do a lot of stuff in Canada right now. We have a few events coming up actually. But you can also see we have our first ever round in India, which I'm really excited for. This summer, if you guys are interested in participating, we have a confirmed hackathon happening in LA online called mini-hacks. And then we also have a computer science university here happening for Canadian universities. And that's going to include universities like Waterloo, UBC, and UOT. And we have a few other hackathons that you can check on our website that we announced about the summer. Talking a bit about our speakers today, we have Melissa Tigas coming in. We're going to do a little fireside chat. She works at TechStars, an accelerator, which is one of the best in the world, with an admittance rate actually lower than that at any university, fewer 1%. So they're very selective, and they hope and help create most defining startups in our modern day. Then we have Matthew Ralph coming in, professor at Georgia Tech. He's going to talk a bit about his research on sustainable systems at Georgia Tech, specifically that of direct air capture. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, this is a big one to have on the reveal. And yes, it is a big cliche, but we're going to do climate change this year. So all of you should be able to check your email from Lucy in a little bit. We can start with the increase, so we're going to give out every one of our icons to help get you a bit of guiding questions, give you a bit of background on the topic, and also define the model of what we're looking for. So this hackathon, we're going to be looking for 3 types of solutions. You pick one of these. It has to either fit within an awareness campaign, a programmatic business solution like a policy that government will push out, or a business or technology. So something like direct air capture, like what Matthew Ralph was doing. Mentors and judges. Mentors are here. They're located at these tables on the side over here at the front. They will also be on Discord for those of you online. Not many people can hear me, so we'll send out an announcement there. But you should be able to find that. They will be wearing the blue badges, blue tags for ISEF, so you should be able to identify them. And just come up here if you have any questions or ping us on Discord and we'll send it to you. Submissions. We talked a bit about this as well. This QR code, this presentation will be sent out. That's why the QR code is here. But the submission is also, the submission is also part of the
And that was configuration, right? It was just the pants not working right.
Check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. So we're going to be starting the fireside chat right now, or in a bit. Just a little announcement. When you guys do kind of make your new teams, let Lucy know what's happening, please. It is vital and very important for your submission that we know who is on what team and whose name is attached to what team code. Otherwise, we cannot give you feedback for your one-pagers, which is something that's very important in events like this. So please make sure to email lucy@xdhacks.com, and we will get it sorted out by the end of the workshops. All right, guys. We'll start now with Melissa. So if you guys could please shut your computers and give your full undivided attention, that would be awesome. We're really excited to have you here. Once again, if you guys can shut your computers, please, we're going to start the next workshop. All right, can everyone see us well? Cool. Okay. Just want to start off. Thank you, Melissa, for coming in today. We're really excited to have someone of your professional skill set. Working in a startup accelerator is something that's very unique, and seeing as all these kids and us, especially at a hackathon, are working together and have projects related to cutting edge technology, definitely some will consider becoming entrepreneurs in the future and going with their own startup. So we're really happy to have you here today. Maybe you can start off by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here today. Thanks for having me. I think hackathons are the coolest thing, so I'm excited to see you all at your tables building together. So my name is Melissa Pigas. I'm the managing director for Techstars Atlanta, powered by JP Morgan. We run an accelerator, and in the accelerator, we work with entrepreneurs to help them do two things with their startups. One, scale their go-to-market strategy. Go-to-market is the entire spectrum of activities involved in a startup launching their technology into the marketplace, selling it to the end customer, commercializing it, further expanding on the product, and also with their fundraise. Fundraising is an essential component of a startup's lifeline. They work with investors to get the necessary funding to help pay for further product development, further research and innovation, and also their operations.
Awesome. How did you become the managing director of Techstars Atlanta, powered by JP Morgan?
Yeah, so I spent the last 14 years as an operator in the startup space, and what it means to be as an operator means that you're on the business team, a member of the C-suite that is helping to drive the business forward. Over the past 14 years, I worked with 7 startups, specifically in the vertical of commerce technology. Of those 7 startups, 6 of them were acquired and 1 of them IPO'd. And I took that collective experience and became an early stage investor. So being one of the first or second rounds of funding into a company's, into their funding rounds. And after investing in about 30 portfolio companies, decided to join forces with Techstars and JP Morgan to expand that operational guidance and funding to a larger bench of entrepreneurs.
That's great. And speaking of funding, that's a very important topic coming to startups. And so maybe can you talk a bit more to, what are the different types of rounds of fundings that happen? What are the requirements to enter that first part of funding? And what do startups like startup accelerators like Techstars look for?
Absolutely. So at every stage of your startup, you'll need funding to help float, again, product development, your operations. You likely need to pay your team. And there's a period of time before your product or your startup is ready to be sold in market, or even if you're selling it, there's an imbalance between the revenue coming in and the funding that you need to cover your expenses. And so very often startups will take on funding from investors. There are many different ways to pursue funding, and it might sound a little counterintuitive, but as an investor, I tell startups, you don't always need to, just because the money is available, you don't always need to take it. When you take on money from investors, you give them equity in return. That's a piece of your business that you're giving away. And that also comes with a set of expectations. And so the best way to fund your business is through revenue. There are other channels as well. There's non-dilutive funding, which is a newer product from investors such as Brex and the like. If you have a consumer product, you can pursue crowdfunding through pre-orders. Depending on the type of technology that you're developing, there are grants from public and private institutions. And then finally, there is more traditional venture capital. Now, across the spectrum of venture capital, we have different rounds. We name those rounds through the various letters of the alphabet. So there's we start off with your, we call it your friends and family or your angel round. This is typically from people in your network who are investing in you. They don't know if your business idea or if your product, it likely doesn't exist yet. And so you can raise a friends and family round, or they're angel investors. They're called angel investors because, again, they're investing in you and use the individual, and there's not as much rigor to your business yet for them to evaluate. Typically, once your product is ready to launch and you're trying to get product market fit, and so product market fit is when you take your product to market and actually understand if it is solving a problem for your customer. That is supported by your seed round funding. And the idea there is that you are planting the seeds for your business. And the subsequent rounds would be your series A, B, C, D. I think some of the latest rounds I've seen are like a series G, but then that's around the point that you would either approach the public markets for an IPO, or you might be acquired, or perhaps at that point you've reached profitability and you remain a private company. So typically when you take on investment from external investors, they are looking for a liquidity event. A liquidity event is when their investment, as it sounds, becomes liquid. They're able to get that money in return. And so very often they're going to push for some sort of liquidity event. In terms of what you do to achieve the various rounds of funding. So again, typically the earliest stages through your angel or your friends and family round, this comes from people who believe in the team that is going to be building, because the product doesn't yet exist. For your seed round, this typically comes from very early stage investors, and what they're looking to understand is a little bit about the team who is building the startup. Why is this the right team to be solving this problem? The market. How big is the market? How large is the opportunity? That's typically quantified through something called TAM, your total addressable market. They're looking at timing. Timing means why now? Why is now the right time to launch your startup, to fund your startup? And then they're also looking for technology. They want to understand what is the defensible IP, the thing about your business that is not easily replicated, the moat around your business, if you will. That's typically what takes you through your seed. And then at your series A and B, what they're looking for is momentum, revenue, and multiples on revenue.
And so you mentioned team a lot. And of course, as a startup, you are investing all your time as a team into whatever product you're creating. And here at this hackathon, what we've tried to do is pair different people with different skill sets into different teams. So how do you look at a team and assess, do they work together? Is there kind of a formula almost for teams when you're looking at a startup?
So I like to tell founders that startup building is a team sport. If you want to go fast, you go alone. And if you want to go far, you go together. And you look at the members of your startup team, and everyone has different strengths and roles they'll play, much like you would on a school project, if you will. And typically you have someone who is very good at the product, who can drive forward the roadmap, the concept, and the development of that product. But a product and technology alone is not enough. That does not make for a successful business. There are the different skills on that team that help turn that idea, that product, into an actual business. This means that you'll need someone who's good at marketing, how you communicate what your product does and its value to the market. You likely need someone who's going to be responsible for your sales efforts. So actually finding buyers, whether it's an individual, it's an organization, it's an entity, and understanding how that organization purchases, how to line up your offering and the way that you're pricing or communicating value to that purchasing entity. Then typically you'll have someone who's responsible for your operations and finance. So the actual backbone of the business, who makes sure that there's enough budget to pursue the various activities, who makes sure that you're on the right strategic course, and then as businesses grow, they add more people to these various teams and even develop new ones around product and roadmap and innovation as they start to specialize.
Right. Today we're here to do one pagers. So can you talk about the importance of a one pager and in a business sense for people who haven't done it before?
Absolutely. So as founders, as inventors, you know your product best, you know your idea best, and that's great. As investors, we have a very short amount of time through which we try to evaluate your business and decide if there is interest for us to lean in and explore further. And so generally a good business skill to have is to be able to succinctly and clearly communicate your ideas. When I say succinctly and clearly, it means making something that can be very complex, very easily understood by any person. And the way to, I think a very simple formula of thinking of how you formulate that pitch is the problem I am solving is X. We solve this problem by doing Y, and we solve it for Z. Z is your person who you're solving it for. And if you can generally fit things into that formula, that helps us understand, is it in scope of the areas that I invest? Is it out of scope? Do I want to lean in? As investors, what we do when you send us all of your information, your pitch deck, content about the way your product works, what we do is we need to distill that into something called an investment memo. It's a one pager, and it again gives you a high level overview of the team, the timing, the traction, the technology, and the TAM. And the very best startups aren't necessarily the ones with the most defensible technology, with the best product. They're those who can distill their idea into a very clear and clean way for investors and for customers to understand. And it's important because if people don't understand what you're doing, and if you can't explain it clearly, it means that you don't understand it well enough, and that it's going to take too much time for someone else to get the point across, which means it reduces the likelihood that you'll get a customer and that you'll get an investor. And so I think one of the very popular adages is where we hear someone say, I'm sorry I wrote you a long email, I didn't have enough time to write a short one. So as you go through the various iterations for any work product, I think editing, distilling, simplifying, making things very tight is a real skill that will serve you well, and also really helps with communication across all fronts, investors, your teams, and otherwise.
Yeah, so those are some very valuable skills. Of course, we're seeing that high level business type thinking from a bird's eye point of view today with the one pager. And you did mention that this is a trend you see with the kind of best startups and the most successful is the ones that can really communicate fluently what they're doing. And speaking of best startups, do you have a favorite startup that maybe you could share a bit about that you've helped?
Yeah, so there are tons of great, it's hard to choose, right? There's so many great startups, and I think what really excites us is the founder origin story. Everyone has a really interesting way of thinking about what inspired them to devote their time and their careers, in fact, to building this product. One of my favorite startups actually is one of the early startups I worked with. It was an organization called Spree Commerce. They're an e-com platform. Today you use their products. If you use GoDaddy to host a website, use their web store. If you've ever used Shopify, if you've bought something from a Shopify store, if you've gone into a brick and mortar store that had a First Data POS terminal, you've used Spree's technology. And what was most exciting about what we built there is because it really brought together the power of community. So before we ever raised a single dollar of funding, Spree spent a few years as an open source project on GitHub. GitHub's a repository where developers, where their code lives, and if you open source it, you can invite the community to collaborate with you on that project. And the efforts and a lot of the technology behind Spree, the first inceptions of it were crowdsourced. And we had over 50,000 commits from developers all over the world who weren't necessarily paid to build this platform, but they jointly believed in the mission of democratizing the e-commerce experience to empower merchants all over the world. And I think that was great because we often say one of the hardest parts of building a startup is team and fostering collaboration. That collaboration can either build or break your business. And so in the open source community, it was truly something special to see people who were motivated by a unifying mission, even when there wasn't an overarching business structure at the very beginning to propel them forward.
Right, that's amazing, and you know, I'm sure you've seen many other patterns like this, not in the e-commerce industry, but even in STEM kind of startups. So maybe you can talk a bit about, seeing as this is a science fair, a bit more about the trends you see with STEM startups, how those founders maybe pivot after approaching an accelerator.
Yeah.
Or...
Absolutely. So we work with tons of STEM founders all the time. And very often, because they start out very focused on the product and technology, and then they have to think about product market fit secondarily, we'll see pivots where it's still might be the core technology or product, but they have to pivot who they're selling to, how they sell it in the market. And one of my favorite STEM founders is a young woman named Shauna from Baltimore. And Shauna actually started off as an electrical engineer for Northrop Grumman, which is a large government contractor based in DC. And through tinkering and working on the engines and seeing how those turbines worked, she was inspired as she was getting ready for work every morning. And she would do her hair. And she found that it took a really long time to dry the product, the extension that she would put in her hair to get herself ready to go to work. And it was through that overall design of what they would do in the aerospace industries that she was actually inspired to create a much smaller version of that is now a dryer that dries synthetic hair in 10 seconds or less, something that traditionally would take women hours to do in preparation. Through that process of tinkering and selling this to market, she actually used those proceeds to create her own STEM summer camp in Baltimore, where she teaches other young people in the city about electrical engineering, about hardware engineering, and more importantly, about how very technical subject matter and content can be extended to solve problems in our everyday lives, and how we see the extensibility between something as complicated as, you know, aerospace turbines and personal use items. And what I love most about Shauna's story is that all of the fruits of the labor, it was important for her to dedicate to paying that forward.
Guys, I understand you want to work on your projects, but Melissa's here and her time is very valuable. So if you guys could please give your full undivided attention, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. There's a bit of chattering happening in the background. You guys will have tons of time to do that later today. Thanks. Sorry, Melissa.
No problem. Yeah, I was gonna say the last piece of that is Shauna's story paying it forward. So it's the fact that she took proceeds and took the process that she used to developing this piece of hardware. One, I think in the world of investing, very often people think that if they have a physical product, that it's not a good candidate for investors. Typically, investors have looked to software because of the attractive unit economics. But she's created something really special. She's really carved out a space for the hardware engineers, and she's used those same parameters for her own lean product development process to create programming for young people in the DMV area who similarly are inspired and interested in learning more about electrical engineering and STEM as a career.
It's quite interesting how you notice kind of that trend of STEM founders kind of being able to apply their technology to places they may not have expected. And that tinkering, of course it is a process that's undertaken by the founder, but how exactly does an accelerator like Techstars help with that tinkering, and what kind of mentorship do they offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that there are a ton of accelerators that exist in the space. I look forward to a world in which there are more spots and accelerators than there are founders who want to build and need support. Some accelerators are very industry specific. So for example, we run a space accelerator in LA, and they are solely for founders who are building in the space arena. Some of our accelerators are vertical agnostic. We work with you at various phases of your product. So we have some accelerators that will work with you on product development. So how do you get from idea to product using the lean product development method? We have others that work on refining your product. So going from your initial iteration of product to achieving product market fit. And then we have later stage accelerators like mine, where companies who are doing around $10 to $15 million in revenue work with us, and we help them accelerate their revenue and raise their Series A and B rounds of funding. So the good news is that regardless of what vertical you're building in, where you're located, what the challenges are, both in building your product or building your startup, It's an exciting time to be building because there have never been more resources, there have never been more accelerators designed to support you. And we support entrepreneurs at various stages of their life and building too. We see a lot of professionals sort of after their academic tenures. I would say just earlier this year, I worked with some founders who were on their way into undergraduate universities, so coming out of high school, but had a great idea that they were excited about building, and so they applied and got into the accelerator. And so I think being a builder is something that's also accessible at any point in your journey.
All right, we'd like to have some questions from the floor as well. So I'd like to actually ask like one question before we take questions from the floor. Can you give like one advice for people who are doing their one pagers today, and then we'll have someone down there take hands. So you can start raising your hands while she's answering this last question.
So I find that the best bit of advice for your one pager and the best way to validate the clarity of it would be to find someone in your network who is not familiar with the area that you're building or what you're building. And just ask them for a casual review and ask them if it's something that if they can tell you what it is that you're building. The reason I'm so passionate about working with founders and entrepreneurs is that my first experiences with entrepreneurship was actually watching my grandfather build his subsistence farming business into an exporting enterprise. And to this day, he remains the most hardworking and impressive founder I've ever met before he even knew what startups or technology was. And very early in my career, when I worked with startups, and we'd have to prepare our fundraising decks, I'd put together my one pager, my investment memo, and I'd print it out, and I would take it to him. And he didn't necessarily know anything about open source technology or e-com technology, but I would sit down with him and I would ask him to read it. And I would ask him to tell me what he understood that I was doing based on what was on that paper. And it's also a great way to teach someone new and bring others into the fold and along on the journey with you.
Okay, so we got one question over here, and I'll hand the mic up.
Hi, my name is Carl Court. My name is Carl Court. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm in the engineering category. And I was kind of wondering if you had any advice as to which ideas are worth kind of trying to run with. How do I identify a good idea that maybe should be looked at in terms of a startup?
Did we get that?
So if I heard the question correctly, it was how do you validate which ideas are worth building? Is that correct? All right, perfect. So there's the best way to validate, first of all, great ideas can and do come from anywhere. And I find that the real key to success is in the execution. So we find that there are tons of great ideas, but maybe the execution, either how they're going to market or who they're selling the product to or how the technology is going to be applied, needs some refining. So the best way to do it is to, again, start off with a very clear problem statement of here's the problem that I'm solving, here's who I'm solving it for, and here's how I'm solving it. Then it starts off with, you can do some basic TAM modeling. So how many people in the world are experiencing this problem that I want to solve? What's the size of the market? What is their collective budget for solving this problem or buying this product? And again, that's more art than science, but you can make some assumptions the same way you would with any sort of math problem and just extrapolate overall what that total addressable market might look like. And then really the next bit of advice that I give to founders at all stages of life is to go talk to your customer. You have to validate your idea. Don't build in a vacuum, ask people for feedback. Whoever fits the profile of your ideal customer, feel free to do some informational interviews. You can say, I'm a student, I'm building something, I have a great idea, I want to understand if you would use this, how does it work for you? How does this fit into your workflow or your daily life? And so your customers, your potential customers will give you that feedback. And then of course you start to look at the feasibility. What are the time and resources that you have at your disposal to start to build that MVP? But the best way to validate whether or not you have a good idea, I would say the broadest definition I have of a good idea is, and it's a business or it's a product that is solving a problem for someone. So go talk to whoever your potential customer is and ask them if it's something they've used.
Awesome. We got one more question over here. Pass you the mic.
Hi, my name is Ali Kari. I'm from Rome, Virginia, and I'm in the animal science category. My question to you was, we've had a lot of opportunities to be networking and everything, and I've been able to meet a lot of new people and get to know them well. But the thing is, my question would be is how do you continue those networking, those connections that you make and make them last past the week? Because if you network with like 50 new people, like how do you keep in contact with them when you might need them after 2 years?
Okay, I want to make sure I heard your question properly. Is it how do you continue networking?
Yeah, so it's like, how do you network to have those long-term connections versus just like a network of just knowing people for a week?
I keep missing the end of that. It's networking to
Like maintaining a network.
maintaining a network. Got it. That's a great question. Again, startup building, innovation is very much a team sport, and I would say being really intentional with your network. So I found that some of the best conversations that I've had with founders, with technologists and innovators, are people who have reached out to me cold with a basic question or idea. In fact, that's how Kate and I got connected. Kate reached out to me with a very clear message. And I would say, do your research, know who you're reaching out to and why. So what is it that they are interested in? How is it they can be helpful? Be very clear with your ask, whether it's for advice or I'd like to stay in touch to learn something. I'm working through a problem. Do you have a specific answer? You have to make it really easy for other people to help you. And I think there's a really simple formula. Some of the best network builders, some of the best community builders. I always say it's give, give, get. We all have people who reach out to us in all walks of life who have been asked for us, and everyone's busy and working on their own thing. But I find that those that really lean into helping others are the most successful. And so first ask yourself, I know what my ask is, I know what I want, but what can I give? How can I give of my time? How can I help others? And so, if I were reaching out to you and I wanted, to collaborate with the hackathon, I'd first ask you, what can I give to the hackathon? What information could I share that would be helpful with others? And then I might ask further on the back of that if there was anything coming out of the hackathon that the winningest ideas we're looking for to help them take flight. And then I might make my ask. And I think generally with networking and with relationships in general, if you approach it from the perspective of how can I help, in addition to what is it that I need, you'll be very successful.
Awesome. We got one last question here.
Hi, I'm Max from Germany, from physics. And my question would be, what books or resources would you recommend to learn the mechanisms of startup building founding?
So in terms of books, reading is the best thing that you can do for your mind and for your own creativity. I found that I don't ever suggest specific business books because I find the books that have served me well in life, in fact, have nothing to do with the curriculum. I think just generally reading from people, from authors from different walks of life and various experiences will help, continue the ever-expanding elasticity of your mind and give you lots of great ideas and inspiration. And in terms of reading to stay connected, I would also say they're great online communities where you can find others who are interested in the same topics, and knowing how to navigate those communities can also be helpful. So I know that there are Reddits for very specific topics, very specific applications of technology, learning how to manage hashtags on Twitter to find others who are in real time talking about the topics that you're interested in can also be a great way to learn and source information from the community as well as connect with others. So continue to read, especially as you go through the various stages of your life. Reading fiction is very important. I find sometimes people fall into the trap of only reading nonfiction, and how-to self-help business books don't do that. And try to give first and connect with others and create a dialogue.
Awesome. And if I can add a bit to that, I read this really cool author, Guy Kawasaki, The Art of the Start. So it's a great book. You should look at that too. Sorry to add on to that. We got 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Laya. I'm from Austin, Texas, and my category is translational medicine. And my question is regarding kind of what ideas to choose to go forward with for startups. So how do you know what ideas are more suited for something like social entrepreneurship versus what ideas are more monetizable for startup culture?
So in fact, investors, we do invest in social impact projects. In fact, impact investing is, I would say, a newer and more popular vein. And so I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. It goes back to the idea that the best way to fund your startup is with revenue. The second best way is you can take on outside investors. I think building a startup, launching a new idea, it is all consuming, it is difficult, but it is work that is worthy. And it's important that you choose something that fuels you and that you're passionate about, because it will be difficult, it will be challenging, and it needs to be an idea that is exciting enough to you that even when it is most difficult, you feel inspired to keep going. But again, there are investors out there that do impact investing, whether it's social impact, ESG, which is, environmental and sustainability, and all those other subsets of impact investing. And so the spectrum of investors is broad and has gotten even broader, and people really start to specialize. And so again, it's about finding those networks of like-minded individuals who are also interested in the same problems that you're interested in solving, and that can be a path to helping you understand both funding, team building, defining that landscape, and doubling down on the problem that you want to solve.
Okay, this is the last one. Guys, if you do have any questions after this, I totally encourage you. Melissa, if you're okay, maybe we could eventually coordinate a way for them to contact you, and hopefully she will be able to hang around for a bit after this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't have a hard stop, I can take a few more questions. That's fine.
We have a few
try to get
more
through as many of
time.
them as we can. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I got one more here.
Hi, I'm Nathaniel. My category is Earth and Environmental Science. I was wondering specifically, what would you include in the one pager? Would you recommend that it's more simple with white space? Or would you recommend that it has pictures and more pizzazz, or like more vibrant?
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the end of that. Could you?
Would you recommend that the one pager has more pictures or more white space?
More pictures or more?
Like plain space.
Negative space. White space.
Got it. I would say for your one pagers, illustrations of your product are really helpful. Again, the white space doesn't really tell me much because it's just white space. So be concise, make sure there's a good flow. Any ways that you can help visualize the problem of a product are always very helpful. And I would also, creating something really solid and tight takes a lot of work. So you might start off with 5 pages that you need to distill down. So it's the editing and the revision process that's really helpful. And again, sharing it with your peers and asking them, if you were trying to evaluate this idea, what's missing from what's on the page? That's often a helpful way to go about it, right? It's like the 5 whys. You ask, why are we solving this problem? How does it work? Why are you doing this? Ask why a few more times. So if you can write down all the questions that someone might have as they're learning about your idea, and then try to succinctly weave those into your one pager, and you can almost check off as you go through, have I answered this question? What are still the open areas? And it's always good to leave them wanting to learn a bit more, because the intention of this one pager is to create a dialogue, to create an opportunity for them to lean in and engage with you.
Okay, one more question here.
Hello, my name is Sarah Park and I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm in behavior sciences. So I was wondering, when startups choose their target population, how do they see how many people their technologies can reach? And how do they find the valuation for their startup?
Yeah, so when you're thinking about dividing your addressable market, you have your beachhead market, and then you have the tangential markets that you'll grow into. And typically the first market that you start in would be your largest addressable market. And then the way you would order them is thinking both about feasibility for market entry through like sales and marketing. So if I already have a vertical, a group of customers that I'm selling into, how much effort would it take to modify my sales and marketing efforts to reach a new market? You'd also look at it from a product perspective. Every time you launch into a new customer vertical, you need to do that customer validation to make sure that Are they going to use the product in the same way? Are the features sufficient for them? We see this with startups all the time. And let's say they launch in the US and then they want to expand into Latin America. They want to expand throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. They want to expand through Asia Pacific. And often they think that just translating the product or the content will be enough for them. But we find that they always have to go through and redo customer discovery to understand how will someone use it in this market. When you localize the solution, what's different and what's needed and what are the nuances that we might be overlooking. And so again, typically the way you order it is based on the size of the market and where the opportunity is biggest, because it's that revenue that you get from those initial markets that help you reinvest in your business to fuel expansion.
Do we have any questions from YouTube? Okay, it's nothing. Cool. Unless there are any last minute questions or hands that I missed. Oh, there's one over there. Give me a second.
Hi, I'm Cooper Weisman. I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida, in the USA, and I'm in the engineering, statics, and dynamics category. And my question is, if your product, okay, that's better. If your product hasn't achieved product market fit after 2 or 3 years, at what point would you recommend that we pivot and change the product entirely?
Yeah, so time isn't your only constraint, so funding is your constraint. And if I would say we like to take the fail fast approach. And so if you see that you're not achieving product market fit, if you've spent enough time within your addressable market, so it's not just that this one buyer wasn't interested in your solution, but it just really didn't fit across a larger sample size. Let's say you talk to 50 customers. You should be taking that feedback and cataloging and iterating and asking yourself, are there minute adjustments that we can make to make it fit? Or, typically we see for product teams, they'll work in quarter-long sprints. And so let's say after 3 months, you're like, have I made adjustments, test that in the market again, make some more adjustments, you test it in the market again. And I would say after 2 or 3 quarters, either you have the wrong customer profile and you need to change who you're approaching and who you're selling to, or it's time to pivot your product altogether. I think a good example of this is we see lots of startups will say, I want to sell to banks, right? My technology really helps with like biometric security for banks, let's say. And very often we ask them to refine because we say the bank is not your buying entity. Who within the bank is using it? Who is buying it? And so that level of specificity, and I think it's really important when we talk about customer profile, your customer is not a vertical, it is not a business, it's not even a business unit. Your customer is an individual, it's someone that you can reach out to and talk to. And so those iterative like customer interviews and understanding their requirements is what, every time you have that, you should be getting feedback that you're documenting. You could say, what about this could they envision using? Did they find helpful? What was not helpful? What did they not understand? And you're collecting that data over time and it should be helping you iterate. So I don't think it should take years to decide that you didn't get product market fit, you should move on. You should constantly be iterating on a quarter-over-quarter basis, and a quarter's 3 months, guys.
Hi, my name is Aaron Sanovich. I'm from Indiana and in computational biology. And my question is, what's your favorite fiction book and your favorite nonfiction book?
My favorite fiction book has to be ISEF by Paulo Coelho. And my favorite nonfiction book, it's very difficult to choose. I'd say it's probably any of the compiled literary works of James Baldwin.
All right.
I think that's the end of this workshop. So thank you, Melissa, for joining us. Can you give a round of applause for her? Yeah, so up next is, we're gonna take a 10-minute break or so before we set up for our next workshop with Dr. Ralph. And it'll be up here, Dr. Ralph is already here, so it'll be a really quick transition.
Thank you again, Melissa. Another round of applause, please. And
Thanks for having me. This was great.
we'll make sure to get contact info from Melissa if she's okay with that. If you guys do have any other questions, she's very knowledgeable, and again, really happy to have you here. Thanks, Melissa. You guys have around 10 minutes, so reconvene with your teams. Maybe you've learned something about the one pager you want to change up now. Go to the washroom if you need to. Again, in Canada, we call them washrooms. They're at the back and they're at the far left and right side. And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes for Dr. Ralph's workshop. Hey everyone, I understand that some of you do not have computers. If you do not have a computer, we have extra Chromebooks that you can get at the back. So just make sure you go do that. Now's the time, it's a break. So if you do want a Chromebook, you can go to the back and there are some over there. Yeah, and let us know if you have any other questions. We'll have around 5 more minutes before we start the next workshop. We hope you look forward to it, and yeah, we'll see you guys then. Hey everyone, we're back. The break is coming to a close. Some people are still making their way back in. However, for the sake of time, we wanted to get started with our second presentation of the day. Want to welcome Matthew here with us today, professor at Georgia Tech and a David White Fellow, and we're very grateful to have him here today to talk a bit about what he is researching at his post at Georgia Tech. It's really cool stuff, and I will cut away from it and I'll let him get right to it.
Thank you, Kane. Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. What I want to do today is introduce the problem of climate change from the perspective of someone who does research on technology to attempt to help with the climate change problem. So I'm going to start with where we stand today. Where we stand today is that we have been increasing the atmospheric concentration of CO2 steadily. Is that good or too loud? Okay. Okay. We've been increasing the flow of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since about 1750. And as we have been measuring it at the top of Mauna Loa in Hawaii since about 1957. And since that time, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has increased from just below 320 parts per million to about 420 parts per million today. So basically in the last 60 years, we have increased the concentration by about 100 parts per million in the atmosphere. Now what you'll see on this curve is that actually it's not a steady increase. There's an oscillation around that exponential growth. That oscillation is caused by the great northern forests breathing CO2 in and out as they grow seasonally. So that's a seasonal variation in the CO2 concentration. Now, how have we done this? Well, we've done it by essentially taking a lot of carbon sequestered by millions of years, and we've put it in the atmosphere and grown our societies through that use of hydrocarbons, things like oil and gas, and things like coal. And slowly over time, we've moved from coal to oil to natural gas. And as we have done so, we have reduced the carbon intensity of our fuels. But we're still putting an awful lot of carbon into the atmosphere. The other thing you'll notice, and you can hardly miss it in today's political environment, is that we have a very uneven distribution of these hydrocarbons and coal. And it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry that's dominated by a few players. And one of the questions that is, as we try to address climate change, can we at the same time rethink how we use CO2 and derive economic benefits that accrue not just to a few countries, but to many countries everywhere in the world? So as I say, today, in fact, in April, for the first time, we crossed 420 parts per million in the atmosphere. And last year, it was at 419. So the way I would pose this is to think about our remaining carbon budget. So you're all probably familiar with the idea of having a budget. We have a certain amount we can spend. Well, this is a table from the most recent international IPCC panel on climate change. And what they have done is they have calculated how much carbon dioxide we have left to emit if we're going to avoid going above, say, 1.7 degrees centigrade warming. And this is with a 50% probability, okay? So with 50% probability, we'll stay below 1.7 warming if we emit 850 gigatons of carbon dioxide over the rest of our existence. So this is not a short-term thing, this is a long-term thing, okay? So the goal is to somehow stay below that level. What I want to argue today is that, in fact, we're never going to do that. We are not going to avoid emitting this much carbon dioxide. And as a result of not being able to avoid emitting that much carbon dioxide, we're going to be faced with a different problem. The problem we're going to be faced with is how do we get it back out of the atmosphere? So how long do we have? Well, the current emission rate is about 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. About 32 gigatons come from our burning of fossil fuels,
And about 8 gigatons come from the CO2 we put in from a land use change in terms of deforestation. So basically, if we emit 40 tons in 22 years, i.e. by the time you are 40 years old, which may seem like an eternity to you now, but believe me, as someone who's on the other side of 40, it's really not that long. By 2044, we will have exceeded our budget. We will have emitted more CO2 into the atmosphere than we would want if we were to keep temperatures below 1.7 degrees warming. This is your generation's problem, and it's your opportunity, and it's a place where your innovation is absolutely critical to be able to solve this problem. Your success is vital. I may be working on it now, but honestly, this is your generation, your problem. You are going to have the solutions we need. And that's what I hope you will think about as you're working on your innovation challenge today. So the way I like to think of this is I like to think of the atmosphere as a bathtub. Now this is a rather fancy bathtub. Just happens I live in a Victorian house and I happen to own one of these types of bathtubs. It really does have these fancy feet. It's completely immobile. It's so heavy you can't move it. And what we're doing, right, is we're taking this 30 gigatons a year of carbon dioxide and we're releasing this through fossil fuel combustion. And we're releasing another 8 gigatons, as I mentioned, through deforestation. And the ocean and land are helping us. They're removing 22 gigatons by themselves right now, which means we're adding about 18 gigatons a year to the atmosphere. If we reduce the emissions, right, what that does is it changes the flow rate into the tub. Unfortunately, it's just changing the flow rate into the tub, which may change the rate at which we accumulate the CO2, but it does nothing to get it out of the atmosphere. So what we have to think about is, are there ways that we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere to be able to drain this tub and keep the level below a critical value where it overspills and has a problem which we do not yet know the consequences of. And so here, what I want to show is this is what would happen if we emitted our current rate for the next 20 years. So that would basically mean we use up our budget. And then we cut our rate by 75% over the next 30 years, which basically says we employ a lot of renewable energy technologies that are essentially becoming mature today. And then we hold our rate steady for the rest of the century. Okay? That would lead to an atmospheric concentration of CO2 of about 520 parts per million, i.e. another 100 parts per million will go into the atmosphere if we were able to do that. Okay? So the problem is, how do we walk this carbon footprint backwards? Because what we'd like to do is take about 100 ppm out of the atmosphere to get back to roughly where we are today, which is about 780 gigatons of CO2, or about 10 gigatons per year. So we've got a challenge to think about how we create technologies and approaches that will lead to taking 10 gigatons a year of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So here are some of the thoughts about how we might do this with what's called negative emission technologies. So I'm going to go through a few of these, and then what I'm going to do is focus on one in particular, which is the one that I work on. Okay, so the first ones are basically to think about how we might enhance our blue carbon, our coastal carbon, growing kelp, for example, off the coast of California, or growing other types of plants in the ocean. Now this is relatively low cost, but we don't actually have that much coastline. So there's actually quite limited in terms of the amount of CO2 that we can remove this way. Another approach is to look at CO2 being sequestered by increasing the amount of trees we grow. So what we can do is we can grow more trees, and then we can potentially use those trees to generate electricity and then capture the CO2 and put that underground, and thereby use the trees or other plants to capture the CO2 and then store it underground, and at the same time generate some power that we can use in our society. Again, this is moderately scalable because it turns out, of course, that we're already doing a lot of carbon sequestration using natural systems today already. So it's hard for us to increase that by an awful lot. So what that leads to is it leads to technologies like, for example, taking rocks and attempting to turn those from their current form into carbonates, and by doing so, capturing CO2 by accelerating the weathering of rocks. Now, this is a very poorly understood process at the moment, but obviously we have a lot of rock in the world that we could potentially turn into carbonate. The other approach would be to do something like direct air capture, where essentially we take some materials and use those to capture CO2 and then take that CO2 and again, store it back underground. And that's the approach I want to focus on today, because this is something that is very scalable, and much like other technologies like solar cells and windmills, it's entirely possible that this is a technology that we could grow to scale to meet the goal of 10 gigatons a year CO2 removal. So, why is this science rather than science fiction? Okay, the concentration in the air is very low, but why is this possible? Well, this is, if you like, my one technical slide of the talk. And I want to try to convince you why this is possible. It's possible because we can start with a dilute input stream, which is our CO2 in the air, and we want to separate it into a concentrated product and the rest of the stream. And the question is, where do we have to apply the work necessary to make this process happen? So if you think about mining, mining involves us digging rock out the ground and bringing it to the surface and crushing it up and attempting to liberate the gold or iron or silver or whatever from the ore. And we put a lot of work into the upfront mining process. Instead, if we could do very little work on the input stream, but instead do a lot of work back here on the concentrated product, then maybe we could change the picture of how difficult dilute separations are. So what we're thinking about is where you have a process that spontaneously removes CO2 from the air, and then we actually remove that from the adsorbent material by doing heating or other type of work on that material. And what that does is it changes the work from being put in here to putting the work in back here on the concentrated product. And so that's actually a process that can be done today. So what are the key components? Well, one approach is to use ceramic monoliths, which are the things that are in your catalytic converters if you still own a conventional gasoline car. These are the things that are in your catalytic converters, and you would blow the air through this and coat the adsorbent material on the inside of this monolith to be able to remove the CO2 from the air. Another approach, which is one that we've been developing at Georgia Tech, is actually to use a hollow fiber, which is about 1 millimeter in diameter. This is an SEM. If you're a scientist or an engineer, at some point in your life, you'll get on a stage and describe an SEM. This is a scanning electron microscope picture, and this is about a micron, about 1,000 microns, and that's about 400 microns. And in this annulus of this fiber is actually a porous structure, and so the air can diffuse into the structure, and then there are these little particles, and these little particles contain the adsorbent that removes CO2 from the air. And so we can essentially blow air past these two structures, and the CO2 will spontaneously react with that material and absorb into the structure. And then what we can do is try to release it from that structure. So both of these are commercially available, they're low cost, and they're low pressure drop. And you can imagine why I want low pressure drop, because I want to blow the air through it, but I don't want to take a lot of energy to blow the air through the device. And if I have low pressure drop, then essentially I won't need too much energy to move the air. And that's the only part of the energy I have to do on the dilute input stream. So that's why this can be done. So here's how it works. And so this is a simulation of the process. And this simulation is the type of work that I do at Georgia Tech. And so what you see that the air is being blown through this device, and the concentration of CO2 in this solid material is building up inside this device over time. And then I take that material, and what I do is I blow steam through the device. And what that does is that causes the CO2 to come out of the material. And as the CO2 comes out of the material, it propagates down the structure and builds up in a plug of CO2. And eventually this plug of CO2 reaches the end of the device and is blown out of the device along with some steam. And what I do is I condense the steam and I recover the CO2. So I can recover the CO2 as a pure stream, and then I can take my material and send it back to the process. And I can do all of this in about 30 to 40 minutes. So I can take these devices and cycle them repeatedly to be able to generate pure CO2 captured from the air, with the use basically of an adsorbent material and some steam. So that's the idea. Can it be done? Well, here it is. This is a process that's being used by a company called Global Thermostat. It's a startup company here in the United States, and this is their device. You can see the big fans at the top. They're pulling the air through these louvered devices here, and behind those louvered devices are those ceramic monoliths that I mentioned. And this is the steam system that is positioned at one of these locations. And what's happening is the monoliths are moving around inside of this device. The air is being pulled through them here, and then the CO2 is being released here. So this is one approach to doing this. And this is Eric Ping. Eric Ping is a former graduate student at Georgia Tech and is now the lead technologist at Global Thermostat. I'm not going to tell you who these other three people are because I'm not allowed to. Here's another approach. This is another startup company. The company is called Avnos. Now, what Avnos is doing is it's doing the same thing with the CO2 absorption and desorption, same thing, but it's added in front of this a water adsorption and desorption process. So what this does is actually to recover both water and carbon dioxide. So one can imagine that you can generate both a pure water that can be used for example, irrigation, or could be used for drinking water, or could be used, in fact, to make hydrogen by electrolyzing it and taking the oxygen off the water and producing hydrogen. And then you can combine the hydrogen with the CO2 and actually make fuels. So this is a way of taking renewable energy and turning it into fuels. And here's one final system, and this one is much more speculative. This is a system we're working on at Georgia Tech, where we actually have a 3D printed contactor, and the wind blows through the contactor. And the contactor is porous enough that you don't need a fan. So I've removed all the work now from the front of the process. All I do is I allow the wind to blow through the device and capture the CO2 in these rods. And what are these rods? Well, they are essentially the same thing that I described earlier. They are these porous materials with my adsorbent inside the cores. And so when I want to recover the CO2, I essentially drop something over the top of it. And these now, because of their construction, these are actually electrically conductive, and they heat up because of their resistance. And because they heat up with their resistance, that releases the CO2, and now we can pull it out of the device at the bottom. And so now we can use entirely renewable electricity to power the device. It's passive wind. There's no carbon footprint. So this has a completely negative carbon footprint as a way of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Now, one other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is, in fact, the Drawdown Georgia project. And this is not my work, but something else that's going on at Georgia Tech. And this might also act as an inspiration to you. This is a national plan that was put forward by Paul Hawken, who is one of the most famous environmentalists of today. And he came up with a large number of possible approaches for reducing the carbon footprint of our activities, from making electricity, our buildings and materials, transportation, food and agriculture, and then other issues as well. And what he has actually been able to show, and what we've been able to demonstrate here in the Drawdown Georgia project, is actually that we can divide up the making or reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that we're emitting. And these are the various different activities that could make up our negative carbon or reducing our carbon footprint. And this has got things like conservation agriculture, composting, etc. So there's a whole bunch of different alternative approaches for reducing our carbon footprint. So that's another aspect of doing this. Okay, so I focus on negative emission technologies. This is a focus on reducing the carbon footprint of our current activities. Okay, so we need innovative solutions here. We've got to reduce our fossil fuel carbon use. So we need to increase renewable energy, increase the rate of recycling, increase energy efficiency, and use efficient bio-based materials. All of these things are critical. We should reduce the amount of CO2 that we're putting in the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. So we should do point source capture as well as direct air capture. And I've argued that we should be thinking about negative emissions technologies because it's quite possible we will overshoot the amount of carbon dioxide we actually want to end up with in this bathtub. So my conclusion is reduce the flow and drain the tub. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take a few questions if there are any.
If there are any questions, same as last time, raise your hand. I'll come to you. Oh, Peter will come to you. Perfect. All right. Do you estimate that the cost of direct air capture and negative emissions technologies are going to decrease according to Moore's law, or will it be a slower pace?
That's a great question. Okay, so what we've seen with renewable technologies like solar panels and wind turbines is we've seen reductions that are not Moore's law level, okay, but they are fast. They're reducing their costs at approximately 25 to 30% per sort of quantity, say a gigawatt of generating capacity. I've done analysis for these direct air capture systems that show we could achieve that same level of cost scale. Okay, now why is that possible? Well, if you look at those devices, most of those components can be mass manufactured and assembled. If you look at the number of devices we have to make in order to, say, for example, capture a gigaton of carbon dioxide per year, it's about creating the automobile manufacturing infrastructure. So if we could manufacture these like we could manufacture automobiles, we could actually do that level of reduction of CO2 in the atmosphere, and the cost of doing it by this approach would come down probably by a factor of 4 or 5. So today, if you think that CO2 capture from the air takes about $250 to $400 a ton, my calculations would suggest that you could bring this down to about $50 to $75 a ton. So with $50 to $75 a ton, it's competitive with almost any of the other technologies for doing so, but it can be now at large scale and doesn't require a lot of land. It's much more efficient, for example, than forests, and can be put right on top of the places we want to sequester it. So we don't have to build pipelines to carry CO2 around the country to be able to put it in the ground.
Hi, I'm George. I'm from Slovenia. I'm interested if your devices could be installed on top of the chimneys of some factories that produce this carbon dioxide. So not just to capture it from our atmosphere, but to capture it at their source.
I didn't really hear the question. Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't really hear it.
Okay, so if this device for capturing the CO2 could be installed on the origin of CO2, like in industry or in factories there that emit this carbon dioxide.
Yeah, so can it be used other than for direct air capture? Right, yes. So the answer is that there are other ways to do this that are actually potentially better than the approach I've just described. What we have done with this approach is to combine it with traditional carbon capture approaches, such as, for example, using liquid solutions to capture CO2. And we've done that, for example, on a natural gas combined cycle power plant. So you take a natural gas combined cycle power plant, which is what is making most of the electricity in this room, and that can be combined with doing point source capture and direct air capture. And basically, by reducing the efficiency of that plant by about 20%, okay, so say taking it from 54% efficiency, say to 34% efficiency, we can actually generate electricity with a negative carbon footprint. So every megawatt of electricity that is now generated by that plant actually puts more CO2 in the ground than it would emit. So essentially, it turns power plants into negative emission generating systems that also generate electricity. So there are definitely synergies between this technology and other ways of capturing carbon dioxide.
All right, 2 questions. The first is, how many gigatons of CO2 will we need to remove using negative emissions technologies to have a significant enough dent on climate change as a whole to justify their use?
Yeah, so I think we need about 5 gigatons worth at least of this type of technology. So a huge amount, to be honest. We've never considered, or we haven't really considered, technologies at this scale to do these sorts of things. It would be an entirely new industry that would be as large as the fossil fuel industry is today. So it would be a significant change in the way that we do things. That's one of the reasons why I believe that if we just take CO2 out of the atmosphere and stick it in the ground, we're not going to be very happy with that answer. Because we've spent all this effort to get all this CO2, and then all we do is put it in the ground. Why don't we reuse that CO2 and actually now change our carbon economy from one that digs carbon out of the ground and puts it in the atmosphere to one that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, uses it, puts it back into the atmosphere, much as plants do. Why can't we adopt that same circular technology as nature has? And the answer is we can. We just have to be prepared to spend a lot of renewable energy to make that cycle happen. And it may turn out that we don't want to do that because we've got better uses for that renewable energy in the short term. And in the long term, we may choose to go to that solution of making our carbon economy circular. So this is a way of circularizing our carbon economy. The question is, do we do it right away? Or do we capture it and put it in the ground to start with, and then come back later and think about making it circular?
So going back to that number, 5 gigatons of CO2 a year, that would be, assuming $50 per ton removed, so that's $250 billion annually. Do you think that primarily the government would fund such a venture, or could private industry also play a part in helping remove CO2?
That's a great question. I think the answer is unless society places a cost on CO2, it's unlikely that we'll see wide-scale capture of CO2, right? So we either have to say we're not going to emit, we're going to put a hard ceiling on the amount of CO2 we're going to emit, or we have to put a price on the CO2 we have to emit. Now, are companies prepared to buy negative emissions? The answer is yes, they are. So Microsoft today buys negative emissions from a company called Climeworks at $600 a ton, as incidentally does Shopify. So there are companies that are prepared to pay these high prices today, but they wouldn't do it if that was the cost, and they had to buy 1 million tons at that cost, right? So the answer is we have to bring the cost down, and the only way we can do that is by scaling it. The only way we can scale it is if there is a market for that scale. The only way we can get to a market for that scale is really to have government policy that suggests that that's something that we need to do, right? If you look at the European market today for carbon credits, it's about $80 to $120 a ton. So that's why if you had this, you could definitely do it. If you look at California, California is about $200 a ton for the low carbon fuel standard today. So there are places in the world that are putting value on carbon dioxide capture at about $100 to $200 a ton.
Any more questions?
There's one over there. Maybe.
All right, I can go for one more, a follow-up to that. So would we have some regions of the world that are more economical for carbon capture because they have greater access to energy? Sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, okay. Would there be some regions of the world that provide a more economical carbon capture service because they have greater access to energy or cheaper access?
Yeah, so are there better places in the world to do carbon capture than others? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, got it. So the answer I think there is more on the sequestration side. So if you look at where it's being deployed today, Iceland. There's a carb fix plant in Iceland, which is where they're doing direct air capture, and they're actually taking the carbon dioxide and putting it in the ground. Why? Because Iceland is a large slab of basalt, and basalt rocks react immediately with CO2 to form these carbonates. So it's not sitting there as CO2, it's actually reacting away and becoming permanently stored as part of the rock structure. So I happen to think that there are places in, for example, the Pacific Northwest, where there are that same type of rock, where it would make a lot of sense to put the CO2 into that rock, okay? So there are good places in the world for that reason. Why else Iceland? Enormous amounts of renewable geothermal energy. So again, you can use that geothermal energy to power these direct air capture plants. So the answer is there are better places in the world than others, but I think it'll be driven by the sequestration geology rather than by sort of other factors.
Hi, how are you, sir? Okay, I have a question for you. Like, as a chemistry teacher, many of my students ask me one particular question that, okay, fine, science is going beyond the boundaries and it's achieving a lot of stuff. We're finding the solutions to prevent the carbon dioxide emissions, but we know that it is possible. But we're still using the same fuels, same diesels, same jet engines are using the fuels, and it's not going to immediately stop the carbon dioxide emissions. So are we working on finding the alternative fuels? Like some of the countries are working by using water as a fuel. So what about the work related to that, replacing the fuels that are going to emit such amount in terms of carbon dioxide emissions?
Yeah, so the question is are people working on alternative fuels?
Yes.
The answer is yes, and there are many different routes to alternative fuels. So, for example, at Georgia Tech, we're doing a lot of work on forestry biomass to fuels, and so we're able to, for example, make jet fuel out of by fermenting essentially lignocellulosic biomass to a molecule that we can then turn into a jet fuel. So there are definitely ways of doing that. If you look at the amount of that we can do, it's unfortunately not enough to address all of the CO2 that we would like to be able to stop emitting, okay? So I think that alternative fuels are a really important way to go, but they need to have several features like not competing with food, for example. But that in the end, that won't be enough. And it's the all of the above statement, right? We're going to need exactly that. And you know, we should be encouraging everybody to work on alternative fuels. We should be encouraging people to work on other ways of doing solar sunlight capture, etc. Right? Yes.
More carbon dioxide emissions.
Yeah. So the answer is we have indeed emitted already enough CO2 to change our climate by 1.0 to 1.1 degrees C. And so far we've done that and we've been just about okay, right? You know, you can see there are some effects, but they're not catastrophic. The concern is that there could be a tipping point when we change the temperature in the atmosphere by so much that actually there's a cascading effect that creates a world which is not very suitable for human habitation, okay? One of the biggest problems is the so-called if you like, the humidity and temperature trap. So that there's a point at which our bodies can no longer reject heat. If the temperature gets high enough and the humidity is high enough, we actually can't cool ourselves. Those events actually are predicted to happen in places in India in the next 30 to 40 years. And that could lead to mass death because people will not be able to cool themselves down unless we avoid those situations. And that's this combination of very high humidity and very high temperature. So that's why I have the concern that if we put too much CO2 in the atmosphere, we may have to bring it back down. Otherwise, we will be in a situation where we have those kind of events on a regular basis. I don't want to scare people, but that's predicted.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Please raise your hand.
All right. All right. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew, once again. That was a really cool presentation. So now you guys have all the tools you need. You know, Melissa mentioned that it's an exciting time to build, and now you know that we only have a carbon budget of 850 gigatons. So now we want you to get down to work and work on your one-pager and create your solution. Thank you again to Matthew. That was a great presentation. You get another round of applause. And we'll leave you guys to it. Mentors are here. The admin table is here. So just let us know what type of help you need. Those of you online looking at the camera, let us know if you have any questions. Just ping us on Discord. We'll send another announcement there. And yeah, guys, now you guys can get to work, and we'll just put the QR codes back on the screen if you guys need that. So thank you, guys. If you guys need to charge your computer, there are some outlets at the very back of the room at the tables there. Again, if you don't have a computer, there are Chromebooks. So if you need a computer, come and find us and we'll get you one. And yeah, ask us if you have any questions. We're here to help. Hey everyone, just want to provide a few updates. So this in-person session is still going to go on for until 5 p.m. We have an activity at 4:40 where you can win t-shirts like was said in the email. So you can win some swag like hackathons, you get a lot of swag. Just a few other announcements. Submission is midnight tonight, so you do not have to submit by 5 p.m. Refer to the emails again, submission form is all there. And then judging will occur virtually over the weekend and into the week to make sure that you guys can get as much feedback as possible. You know, this is an event that's about learning, so we want to make sure you get all that. You will get certificates of participation. We've been asked by a few people about that, so we'll work on those and we will send them out. And additionally, the winners of the one-pager will get their one-pagers put on the website, get some t-shirts as well, and they will get certificates for that to recognize their accomplishments. So do stick around. There is going to be a pretty fun activity. And yeah, we'll see you guys in around half an hour for that. 10 more minutes until the activity, guys. So now is the time to go to the washroom if you have to, because the activity will require your full attention and hard work. So make sure you get that out of the way if you have to now. Again, check your emails tonight. After the in-person portion is finished, we'll send out another email just to make sure you have that submission link. We'll still be getting questions about that, and also some more details about how judging will proceed over the weekend and through the next week. Hello, hello. Can anyone hear me? We're going to be starting the activity shortly. We just ask that all the teams at the back of the room come move up to the front. It'll be a lot easier to participate if you do. You also will need the pieces of paper on your table. So in the next 2 minutes, just come and move back to your team code table, and we'll start the activity in a few minutes. Again, everyone at the back, if you can come move to your team code table, that would be great. Otherwise, you probably will have a hard time winning this event.
All right, is everyone coming down? Please don't start yet, we actually have a timer. We had the slide up by accident, I'm sorry. Just wait a little bit longer for everyone to come down. Some of the teams are still folding. Please stop. We have a timer for everyone to be fair. All right, good. All right. My name is Peter. I'm your host for today's fun activity, which many of you guys may already know is a paper airplane contest, the most rigorous of engineering challenges. As aspiring scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, you guys probably already know what a paper airplane contest is. Each table gets one piece of paper, the one with your team number on it. We said to not crumble it for this reason. If you're missing a team number piece of paper, you can come up. We have some spare scrap paper for you to use, where you can then write your team number on it. Each one of you gets 10 minutes to design and construct a paper airplane. And after 10 minutes, each team will send a designated thrower up to the stage, and we will all throw the airplanes once at the count of 3. The winner will be the paper airplane that flies the farthest. So don't design a hang time airplane. It'll have to fly the farthest from the stage by displacement. And the winning team will get some XdHacks t-shirts. I guess I'm going to start the timer for 10 minutes. Time starts now. Yep. You didn't make your first decision.
Just a friendly reminder, everyone, please test your paper airplanes safely. We do not promote violence. Thank you. Five minutes. Remember to write your team number on the paper airplane so we can identify which team goes the farthest.
Please use the paper with your team code on it. Thank you.
1 minute, everyone, 1 minute. Thirty seconds, 30 seconds. So if you are done your paper airplane, each team have one designated thrower come up on stage. Each team with one designated thrower come up on stage. And everyone else move to the side of the room. All right. Everyone else move to the side of the room just for safety. Every team send one designated thrower up to the stage. What about this line? Just this line right here. Yeah. Before you guys throw, let's set a benchmark. I have a paper airplane that I made in the last 5 minutes. In theory, this should be good. Don't trust me on this. I'm an aerospace engineering student at Georgia Tech, but I don't think I'm very good at making paper airplanes. We'll see. All right, let's see how this one flies. And also, Kaden, throw yours as well. Let's see if you guys can beat the XdHacks team. Let me throw mine. Let's see how it flies. Not very well. As you can see, yeah. Don't tell my professors about this, please. Don't tell them. This will be embarrassing. All right, Kaden, throw yours. Throw yours, Kaden. Go. 3, 2, 1, throw. Oh, that was not well. Oh. There's one really long one that went really far. Oh, that one's gone really far. But the ball, is that the ball? All right. Kaden, you want to go check? Where's the farthest plane? Can we check? Let's see. I think there's a very long one that's pretty far. Oh, there's a plane here. There's a plane here. Oh, it didn't come? Okay, good. Can we find the farthest plane? Oh, we found the ball. We found the ball. Okay. The ball. This one? Is there no farther aircraft? All right. It appears the winner is a paper ball, very, very, very dense paper ball. Let's see which team that made this one.
As the aerospace engineer Peter put it, sometimes the best engineering solution is the most simple solution.
Let's see.
Team
238.
238. Well done, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you all here, and we hope you had a fun time. As the event is still running and submissions are still open, we ask that you guys, ask us questions if you have any questions on Discord or via email. Please clean up, don't leave your paper on the ground, make sure to pop it in the recycling. We would hate to leave a mess here for our hosts. In addition to that, if you did borrow a Chromebook, make sure to come return it to the admin table, thank you. Other than that, that's all for today, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. We can't wait to look at your projects and look out in your email for judging.
Good job, everyone. Good job.
Yeah, 2:38.
And that's good that they don't take the small teachers.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be in your emails. Make sure to read them. Again, please make sure to take away all the paper that you guys have used folding and pop it in the paper recycling. If you took a Chromebook, please come to the admin table and return said Chromebook. And we will hopefully see you guys' projects soon. Submission is 12 at midnight. So please make sure to submit before tomorrow. Thank you, guys.